We're continuing our conversation with Scott Adams, author of many, many books, as well as the creator of the Dilbert comic strip, and increasingly a sort of political, social critic of sorts, I would say. Do you see yourself that way?
Well, I'm an observer, and I like to talk about persuasion in politics more than the just naked politics of it. My book, Win Bigly, is about persuasion and President Trump's persuasion in particular, and I try to put that filter on everything from the economy to immigration to the rest of the stuff.
So to pick up where we left off, we were talking about the tax plan of the president, and we can sort of continue there or look at tariffs, which I know we have to look at sort of separately. But to go back to the sort of main thread that I was pointing to, I'm not seeing the ways in which we can link those policies to what we would call a strong and robust economy beyond your assertion that you made in part one, that we may have expected to see a drop-off in the economic indicators as we moved away from the bottom of a recession. It's a bit arbitrary to say that that should have already happened. I mean, maybe we're a year from that. Maybe we're 3 years from that. The question that I'm pointing to more is, what can we really say empirically about the policy of Donald Trump that proves to us that he has kept that going, other than just saying, well, it hasn't moved the indicators one way or the other?
Yeah, when you're talking about politics and you're talking about economics in particular, there are a lot of variables, and I don't think you can ever get to the point of, yeah, he did this, and so that caused that.
Okay.
You have to sort of look at all the variables, and you have to ask yourself, are they the right decisions? And if they seem right, sort of in the abstract, are we seeing a set of results that would be consistent with making right decisions? So, for example, we would imagine that cutting taxes would have a good psychological benefit, and we observed that the consumer confidence, et cetera, were sky high. I think they may have pulled back a little bit because of the stock market, but in general, we saw that it was a decision that should have worked, meaning it should have been good for the economy, and then we see that the economy is good. That's different from saying it caused it.
Well, but
So
I think
you
it's
have to-
also not, I think you're assuming a lot by merely saying a tax cut increases confidence in the economy. It depends who gets the tax cut, right? Because if people who are very wealthy get a tax cut, and we know that because of the diminishing marginal value, a utility of a dollar, they're mostly saving that money. I don't know why, again, unless the average middle-class person is an adherent of supply-side economics, why the average middle-class person would say, I'm more confident in the economy because Scott Adams got a tax cut, for example.
Well, the people who are getting tax cuts typically are the ones starting businesses. They're responsible for the largest part of economic activity. So what you would expect is that it would work exactly the way it played out. But your question is more to the psychology.
No, I don't think
the
let me
average
be
person?
clear. I don't think it is, because here's where I think we actually disagree on the way that the tax cut works. If you give someone who is already very wealthy, for example, a tax cut, number one, the economic theory of the diminishing marginal utility of money means that $1,000 to them is of far smaller value or utility than $1,000 to someone who makes $30,000. Would we at least both agree with that piece?
Yeah, of course.
We would. Additionally, the person for whom that $1,000 is not really worth very much is not as likely to spend that money as the person who earns $30,000. It's much more likely they would just put that money in a bank account. It's almost like a rounding error for them. They wouldn't even really notice it. Do we agree with that piece?
Yes.
We do. And based on the concept of economic multipliers, we know that someone putting $1,000 in a saving account is not nearly as good for the economy by several orders of magnitude as someone taking that $1,000 and spending it at the grocery store and on a new car and on a vacation. Would we agree with that piece of it?
You're saying a dollar spent on expense is better than a dollar invested?
I'm saying that saving money in a bank account is not stimulative in the way that, for example, supporting local businesses by buying products and services is.
Yes,
Okay.
I agree.
So therefore, don't we have to come to the conclusion that simply giving a tax cut to rich people is not this obviously great thing for the economy?
Yeah, here's the psychology part of that.
Okay.
What are all of the major news organizations reporting about the tax cut? Because I'm pretty sure that the news, the professionals who essentially assign opinions to the public,
Okay.
because the public doesn't have an independent opinion about the economy. Very few of them have any kind of background in which that would make any sense.
That's fair.
So for economics and politics and any of the big questions in life, our opinions are assigned to us by the people on television, the people in the news, the opinion makers. And the opinion makers are pretty well agreed that tax cuts are stimulative.
So
So that
basically, you're
should
saying that
have,
it almost doesn't matter that giving tax cuts to rich people is not stimulative in the way that giving a middle class tax cut is. If people believe that it is, then what? People go and spend money they don't actually have because they think tax cuts for rich people are good?
in general, optimism drives the economy. Would you agree with that statement?
Well, I think that optimism by those who are controlling whether the Dow goes up or down does drive the economy. But I'm not sure I've seen any evidence that, Joe Schmo who makes $37,000 a year being optimistic actually drives the economy before just getting Joe to make some bad decisions and going into credit card debt.
So in order for the economy to grow, people have to think that next year is going to be better than this year so that they will invest. So in the investor class, there are people who are investing who maybe would not have otherwise just because of the psychology of it. They've been told, hey, tax cuts. Now, tax cuts, we're talking at it like it's an isolated thing. If everything depended on tax cuts, I'm not sure that would even be enough of a variable to move the world. But we're also talking about a bigger story of regulations being cut. Frankly, I can't think of one regulation specifically that got cut that makes any real world difference. But as long as the president's talking about it and people think that matters, and maybe it does, I don't know, then that's another piece of information that says, oh, optimism. You see him negotiating with other countries. We'll talk about that more.
Yeah.
But that makes people think, oh, that's a good thing. That's somebody who knows what they're doing. They're playing tough. Might be a little pain in the short run, but should work out. So the president has embarked on a package of influence, if you will, that collectively makes the average person think, I think things are going in the right direction. And
Then
when
why
people
does he
think
only
that,
have a 38%? If it's the average person who thinks things are going well, why is his approval rating 38%?
Well, his approval rating is not based on the economy alone. If it were, I suppose we'd get different numbers.
But
By
it
the way,
is it is always one of the most important elements for figuring out whether you think the president's doing a good job. Self-reported, people say economy is a top issue.
do you know the stats offhand? I don't. Of how many people approve of the president's economics?
Not offhand.
It's higher
No,
than,
not offhand.
but it's higher, right?
I'm not
closer
sure,
to
honestly.
50%. Right. So if you can get any politician in this country to get a 40 to 50% approval on anything in the year 2019, that's really good, right? Because we have such a team sport thing going on that nobody's going to get 70% approval on anything anymore. Those days are gone. So if you're telling me the president only got 40% or only got 50% approval on a specific thing, my immediate reaction is that's probably about as good as you can do.
I guess that makes
world.
it all the more amazing that when you say to people, do you think the government has a duty to provide some basic level of health care, regardless of ability to pay? It's amazing that there's more than 70% on that, isn't it?
Oh, on healthcare, I'm a critic of the president.
Yeah,
So
no, I
I'm
wasn't
probably,
implying you weren't. I'm just saying that it's
yeah.
amazing that there's actually 70% is all that more amazing when you consider that. There's
Well, here's what's amazing about that number. It's amazing that the Republicans don't have a plan, even a bad plan. Just any kind of a frickin' plan is, I would say, it's unforgivable. I mean, it's horrible. So
don't disagree there.
I'm a strong critic of that. That is one of the few cases where we can all agree. And I think the 70% gets to the fact that nobody's got an idea how to fix this, but everybody wants it fixed.
I had a whole bunch of other stuff to ask about politically, but we're sort of short on time. So one thing I wanted to mention is this morning you tweeted that the shutdown is a Nancy Pelosi tantrum and that she can't let Trump win. I'm curious about that. I mean, if one believes that the wall is the wrong way to spend money and is ineffective, why should she give the guy money for it? And as far as it being a Pelosi tantrum, talk about what you mean by that, because Trump said he would shut it down and he did. How does that make it a Pelosi tantrum? I don't get that.
Well, that was a Twitter comment, which of course are always a little bit of hyperbole, but I'll give you the more legitimate answer.
All right.
Both Pelosi and Trump have the power to open the government. All they'd have to do is give the other one whatever it is that they want. So it's not one person close the government. Both of them have to disagree with the other side. So it's kind of a tie.
No,
if you're being
Scott,
fair about it.
No. That is not fair. If there's a negotiation, a divorce negotiation, and one party, I know you don't like analogies, but I'll make one. And one party goes to the other and says, "Hey, listen, I want 99% of all of your future earnings," and the other party says, "No, I'm not going to do that."
Well, here's why I don't like analogies.
You've said that because they weren't able to agree, they're equally responsible, but that's not actually the case. Donald Trump said, "I will shut it down if I don't get money for the wall," and that's what he wanted, and that's not. There's no expectation that he's supposed to get what he wants.
Well, keep in mind that we have two sides that are actually in complete agreement. So if, like your analogy of the married couple who are getting the divorce, they're in disagreement. So in that case, one of them could actually be to blame for any impasse because they're disagreeing.
Okay.
Both Republicans and Democrats have agreed that engineers, they don't say these words and they should, but engineers need to decide, where do you put a fence? Where do you put some drones? Where do you put more of a solid structure? Or is it more sensible and economical? And does it meet the specs better to put a steel slat structure? I think you would agree that Democrats, at least the Pelosi types, are not open borders people. They would like a competent border security. And in the past, they have been okay with various fancy, wall-like structures, and have even funded them as recently. So to imagine that these two groups have an actual disagreement, I don't think you can claim that in any genuine sense.
No,
this
I
is
think
not
you
a
can.
real
I think you can, and I think here's why. I'm not an open borders person. I don't think that there is actually the immigration crisis that Trump and some on the right describe. And the reasons why are, number one, we have a net outflow of undocumented immigrants to Mexico. Number two, economically, we know that undocumented immigrants are paying into welfare systems they will never get benefits back out of. Number three, undocumented immigrants commit crime at lower rates than American-born citizens. So it's not that I can't figure out what it is that the border should be, engineers, slats, or concrete, or whatever. It's that I think this is a solution to a problem that has been blown up. 2/3 of undocumented immigrants are here on overstayed visas. So I think that Nancy Pelosi's position is not incoherent, that she doesn't think we should have open borders, but she thinks $25 billion in total or $5 billion initially for this wall is not a good idea. I think that's coherent.
Which part of that do you think Trump disagrees with?
He believes that this is an acute crisis. He believes that undocumented immigrants commit crimes at higher rates than American-born citizens. I mean, I think he disagrees with almost everything.
Wait. Let's take one at a time.
Yeah.
You think he thinks that American-born people who are not documented commit crimes at a higher rate than the rest of citizens?
No, not American-born people. I'm talking about, he said many times that the sort of criminal character is how he has described undocumented immigrants, and the data, it's not my opinion. If the data,
hold on.
Yeah.
Right, but hold on. I don't believe he's given conflicting data when I hear the Republican opinion on this, which, by the way, I don't completely, buy into that side of the opinion.
Okay.
But when I hear the opinion, what I hear is, why would we let one crime in if we could prevent it? Like,
Yeah,
it's
but
not a percentage
not
question.
that's not an adult way to actually think about it, right? This is sort of any time that government has to establish or law enforcement has to establish a system for dissuading an action that we don't want, you can always say, let's go to the next level and next level until zero people are the ones that are doing this thing that we don't want done. But at a certain point, you do have to evaluate what is the cost and what is the benefit. I don't think that's crazy, right? I mean, if the wall were to cost 200 billion to prevent 100 people from crossing illegally, would we still be saying that it's worth it?
No,
We wouldn't.
no.
Yeah. So at a certain
But
point, we have to say,
but
okay, well,
but
25
let's
billion when there's a net outflow. What is the limit is the question.
what well, you're giving me lots of different topics, and I want to at least drill down on any one of them.
Sure.
The question about the net outflows doesn't get to the fact that there are, a number of people coming in that cause problems.
Sure.
And wouldn't it be better if they could all come in, but under a legal system where we know who it is and we make sure they're part of the process?
That's fair.
Remember, the Republican point of view is not stop people from coming in. That's not the view. The view is, can't we find a way to force them to come in legally so that the system is working for them the same way it's working for the citizens?
Yeah, that's the most sanitized version that we've sometimes heard. But then when we remember, well, we want people from Norway rather than shithole countries, and they're not sending their best, they're sending criminals and rapists, and some I'm sure are good people, and 2/3 are not coming in. But hold on. And 2/3 are not actually crossing the border. I don't know how all of that gets us to the solution's a $25 billion wall.
Let me just pick off your worst part of thinking in that statement. The fact that the vast majority of people come in through overstayed visas is not in any way connected to whether you should have good border security. Because the fact that somebody might burglarize my home doesn't stop me from not wanting to be mugged in my car. I mean, they're just different things.
They're different things, but they're not in the sense that if what we're trying to do is to most quickly and most efficiently get ourselves to the fewest number of undocumented immigrants in the country, you would deal with the worst problem first. And it just so happens that the one that represents 2/3 rather than 1/3 could be dealt with in ways that would be far less controversial and much easier politically to deal with.
Wait, are you saying that there's an easy solution to the 2/3 visa overstays?
I'm not saying it's an easy solution, but what I am saying is that it would be much simpler politically.
No, how about you're saying there's no solution? So you have one big problem, the visa overstays, and one smaller problem. The smaller problem has, in the opinion of Republicans, a reasonably normal, obvious way to fix it, which is improving border security. You can argue about the technique. The visa overstays, to the best of my knowledge, doesn't have a solution.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think no one? Why do you think there isn't?
Let me finish the thought. There might be, but let me finish the thought. There, in no way would you not solve the smaller problem that you can solve just because there exists a problem you can't solve elsewhere. I mean, that makes no sense at all.
No, I think that the characterization of that argument implies that because we haven't seen a focus politically on the 2/3, that we just don't know how to do it. That the reasons are political. The wall is something that is a sort of metaphor for Trump being strong and Republicans being strong, saying instead, we're going to focus on what is actually the bigger problem here. It's not a winner politically. There's no imagery associated with it that's beneficial for Trump to say, we're going to, I guess, focus more on enforcing overstayed visas. It's not sexy. That's why they're not talking about it.
I think they're not talking about it because nobody has a suggestion.
No, I don't think so.
If you have, really? How come we don't know it? It's the biggest problem in immigration, and neither of us have even heard a suggested solution.
But
I haven't heard one.
Are you saying that the reason we haven't heard of how to deal with that is simply that no one has any ideas? It's because politically there's no benefit to talking about it.
I think that's a stretch
I don't
because
think so.
it seems to be you think if the president couldn't easily solve 2/3 of the illegal immigration problem, you think he wouldn't do it?
There's no
That,
benefit
that,
to the
that
imagery and image that he wants to develop by talking about this wall. He's the builder.
is,
Mexico will pay for it. That is politically
yeah,
beneficial in a way that dealing with the not sexy 2/3 of overstayed visas is simply not. That's just the reality.
no, that's not the reality. Those are two separate problems. One has an obvious solution and one doesn't. That's all I see.
Okay, well, I also don't think that the wall is the obvious solution. I think it's not a good solution, but I don't think we're going to agree on that element of this either.
Oh, no, wait, we're not disagreeing on the wall. I think the wall, I think you would agree we need some border security and that you and I and politicians are not the ones to decide where do you put a wall, where do you put electronic surveillance. Would you agree? We're probably on exactly the same
I
side there.
think that the idea, I've seen you float this idea that, quote, engineers should decide. This is more than just do you use see-through slats or concrete and how many miles do you build. Engineers can certainly make recommendations on that. They can't weigh the cost of that versus the benefit and the political alternatives that also exist. I think it's fine to ask engineers about rebar versus concrete, but I don't think engineers
Oh,
have the
wait a minute.
solution here.
No, engineers do look at the economics, so they would look at all the solutions. So they don't just make materials decisions. They are primarily in the job of what's the best way to make it work to your specifications. The specifications would include being able to see through it, which might lead them toward a metal, a steel solution instead of concrete, and that'd be fine.
Okay, but whether you can see through the border wall or not doesn't tell us in the context of the number of people that are coming in, what this would cost in total, and all of the other considerations, whether it should be done at all.
Well, they're going to start with the specs, and the specifications would be something like we have to see through it, we have to be able to build it in these places, and it should stop, 90% of the people who might try to get over it. So something like that would be the specs. And then the engineers would say, okay, best way to do that is steel slats or concrete, or in these places, we don't need it, just put some fence there. Israel's wall is mostly fence. A lot of people don't know that. So, and in Israel, the decision about where to put a wall and where to put a fence has more to do with how much width you have on the border to work with. If you have a lot of space, then a fence with, electronic means and stuff works great. But let's say you're in a populated area where you don't have enough space to build, on either side of the wall, then the wall is sort of your default.
Yeah, but
So
this,
Israel
but
is
Scott,
mostly not wall.
what this doesn't tell us is whether we should be working on the wall versus something totally different altogether in dealing with this problem or others. That's the point I'm trying to make. I don't think it's even really a controversial one.
Well, but that's like saying, why would we work on the wall when people are still getting speeding tickets? They're just different. Why don't you solve all the problems?
No, they're not at all, because local police. No, there is a limited amount. That's local police departments work on speeding tickets and how to set speed limits. When it comes to federal government priorities, there is some limit both to the amount of legislative time, political capital, and funding. You grant that that's different than just saying people speed in Boston, so why are we talking about a wall?
I rest my case that analogies never persuade anybody, as my analogy completely failed because you just pick out the differences and focus on them.
Yes,
The point is
victim of your own analogy, I guess.
All right. But the point is, the immigration is a big topic.
Yeah.
But you can break it into subtopics. People
Yes.
coming across borders, people doing visa overstays. Because you don't have a solution for one part of it,
Yes.
is in no way evidence or logical. It does not logically suggest that you should not solve the part you can solve. And that's actually the argument I'm hearing. And my mind just goes blah, 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 when I hear that, because there's just no connective tissue to that thought.
All
You
right.
solve the problems you can solve.
Well, I think that we would only be continuing to disagree on the same point. So let's wrap up with just one last thing, which is Mexico's obviously not paying for the wall, right?
Not in any direct way that I could see, no.
No. Okay. It's always nice to end on a point of agreement. Scott Adams, creator of the world famous Dilbert comic strip. If I was ever written into the comic strip as a character, even as a horrible person, it would still be an incredible thing. And maybe someday we will see that. Scott Adams, always great to talk to you.
All right, great to talk to you. Thanks for this conversation.